Hello everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Olivia Collette, and I'm the marketing coordinator at Concordia University's John Molson Executive Center. Before we start the webinar, I wanted to tell you a little bit about our guest speaker, Ted Klein. Ted develops and facilitates program at the John Molson Executive Center, the Leadership Institute, and What Comes Next, focusing on empowerment, flourishing leadership, effective communication, creative collaboration, and next level networking. He's also a senior instructor at Concordia Continuing Education, where he teaches 4 courses in the Leadership Certificate program. Ted is originally from California, and he completed his MBA at HEC Montreal. Ted, thank you so much for joining us today.
So wonderful to be here, Olivia. Thank you.
Firstly, it feels like we're living in very uncertain times right now. And I'm wondering if you could describe what you're seeing out there in the workforce that makes these times feel particularly volatile.
Yeah, absolutely. It's common to use this acronym VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and it's only been accelerating. If I were to ask people, I'm not going to, but if I were to ask you to put into the chat some of the ways these have been manifesting over the last, say, 5 years, we would see hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. From an employee perspective, we're feeling this sense of bani, brittle, anxious, nonlinear, incomprehensible. What do we mean by this? For one, political instability. So if tariffs can be enacted on a whim, the entire strategic plan might need to be thrown out the window and revised, right? We're also seeing incredible instability in terms of global pandemics, epidemics, elements related to weather changes, population migration that are affecting many industries. And I think the biggest one affecting a lot of us here today is technological changes and advancement. So the acceleration of artificial intelligence is going to affect everyone's roles and affect them in ways that we don't quite understand yet. So these are just a few examples. Going deeper, there are generational changes in how we approach work that are affecting how leaders need to approach working with employees. And there are big shifts in terms of expectations and in terms of loyalty and in terms of what we think of as meaningful work, how we connect with our work. So all of these things are just examples of how that volatility has increased and will probably continue to increase in the next few years.
In your opinion, and based also on what you've observed, what is the usual impact that these types of disruptions have on leadership?
Yeah, so if we're not able to bend, we break, right? Think of the bamboo in the wind. This is the brittle element. For employees, the anxiety has increased significantly. There are higher levels of stress, higher levels of burnout, higher levels of people going on disability, for instance. There is a lot of quiet quitting going on. There's a lot of resistance to change. And there's also a sense that there are greater causes to big changes that we can't quite understand. So if somebody can tweet something that will cause our whole industry to shift overnight, that's the sense that this is sort of non-linear, that there's some surprise that could be coming at any moment, which heightens the anxiety and the tension. Similarly, the incomprehensible nature is such that we don't exactly know what's ahead. We have to pivot faster because even the leaders from the big tech companies that I work with don't fully understand what AI is doing and where it's going. So as a result, there's this big sense of how do we get more grounded? How do we increase our well-being and decrease that anxiety and that stress and do it in a way that allow our organizations to succeed with the mandates that they've set up for themselves?
You teach a course at the John Molson Executive Center called Flourishing Leadership in Challenging Times. So, how can leaders flourish during these times?
It's a big question. And we've broken it down into a few key modules from a big perspective, big picture perspective. I want to focus first on self and social awareness, these core tenets of emotional intelligence. So without self-awareness, a leader is literally like a bull in a a China shock can come crashing through an organization. Any change that they want to institute, any motivation they want to instill can be completely decimated by not being aware of the effect that they are having on others, not just their actions, but their emotional states as well. Okay, so that's the first element. The second is a sense that leaders need to be more empathetic in the right way. So there is emotional empathy, feeling what people are feeling, but this can lead to burnout on behalf of the leader as well, overwhelm, exhaustion, taking on too much. We also have a sense of cognitive empathy, of knowing what people are feeling and what their needs are. And this can lead to what we call rational compassion. So that compassionate element of empathy is really crucial and increasingly crucial as people become more sensitive to what's possible within an organization, how we work and how we interact with each other and how we connect with the work and each other. The third core competency, active listening. And I don't mean giving the impression of listening. I mean deeply hearing the essence of what someone is saying, of what they're needing, of actually taking the time to listen properly. So we'll come back to this core competency. And then adapting those leadership styles to context. So we might be used to using a command and control style or a pace setter style, but when are we using our visionary style, our democratic style, our affiliative style? When are we using our coaching style for long-term sustainable change within the organization? We need to be able to adapt and be able to use all of these styles at some point. And finally, we need to help people make really good mistakes that allow organizations to be learning organizations. We need this for innovation, and innovation is crucial for us to be able to adapt in the world that we're living in today. So within our program, I focus on 5 key modules that we can go more in depth about: psychological safety, adaptability, motivation, storytelling, and what we call positive leadership or positive energizers.
Well, so speaking of positive leadership and positive energizers, when you and I were discussing the topic for this webinar, you talked about the science of happiness. What is that, and how do people bring that into their leadership practice?
This is a huge shift in the sort of the history of psychology, and we can kind of date it to the late 90s when Martin Seligman uh, led the American Psychological Association and put this concept of positive psychology front and center in researchers' minds. So traditionally, psychology was focused on bringing people up to a baseline. So we're working with individuals who needed help to get to a baseline, what we would consider a sort of normal level, low level baseline happiness. And with positive psychology, the emphasis is on how can we research and develop exercises and intentional activities that allow people to actually raise their baseline life satisfaction in a sustainable way. So since that time, in the last 3 decades, there have been thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed studies in a variety of different categories that address this key element of what is happiness. So when we talk about happiness in the context of leadership, we are really talking about what the Greeks would call eudaimonia, which is flourishing. And I want to just say that this is slightly different than our concept of hedonia, the pursuit of pleasure. So although there are very pleasurable components in a healthy ecosystem of positive emotions, one of the key concerns is how do we focus on what is meaningful and purposeful in our lives to develop the conditions for joy to arise spontaneously. So in the science of happiness, they're looking at categories that are very diverse, from how we frame our lives, autobiographical narrative, our goals, and our perspective, the study of gratitude, the study of savoring, the science of wonder, of awe, the science of order, of personal hygiene, of systemic justice, another form of order that we need to be considered happy with our lives. Consumption, exercise, sleep, exposure to natural light or fresh air. There's also the science of wildness, what psychologists call high arousal play, creative abandonment, creative destruction. And then the alternative, low arousal play, hygge, or herkel-derkel, as the Scottish call staying in bed longer than you should. The science of self-compassion, the science of kindness, the science of heroism and altruism, the science of social compassion, the science of attention. And some of these have a very sort of outsized effect on our ROI, our return on investment, in terms of our intentional activities. So we know now that happiness is determined in part by genetic composition, in part by how we were raised, but a significant portion of our baseline life satisfaction, which we can raise, is attributed to intentional activities. And this has profound implications for how we lead, how we organize work, and how we organize flow at work. So in addition to Martin Seligman, we have Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who focused his research on flow states or states of optimal performance, peak performance, which also have vast implications on how we organize our work.
I want to take a moment to also discuss how this translates at the organizational level. And I want to look first at the employees. So, what do employees need the most during challenging times?
It's a great question. The first and foremost study I'd like to point to was Project Aristotle at Google. Google wanted to know what made their best teams outperform other teams in the organization. They had all these theories. They thought it was the teams that were the most intelligent on a quantitative scale, or the most creative, or perhaps they were the teams that had the most experience, or maybe it was the teams that were able to check all the boxes in terms of their education. They had all these theories. What they found was that the best teams had an equal distribution of conversational turn taking. So when they were coming up with ideas, for instance, everyone contributed about the same amount. The second key component was higher than average social sensitivity. They were more attuned to what each other were feeling and what each member of the team needed. And they acted based on that. So this was kind of shocking for them. But when we look at the research of people like Amy Edmondson, who's focused her career at Harvard on psychological safety, it makes perfect sense. Employees need trust. They need to trust their leaders, and they need to be trusted. Both directions. This is foundational. They need their leaders to be exhibiting and acting on situational humility. Leaders don't have all the answers, and they need to be transparent about the fact that they don't have all the answers. They need to help bring out the talents of those around them. Individual employees also need a sense that their work really matters, right? We need to be able to tie their work directly with the larger story, the bigger picture. No matter what the task is that the employee is doing, their work is heroic. And in many cases, it falls on individual leaders in the organization to be able to tell the right story that allows people to connect their work with something more meaningful. The bigger the crisis, the higher the stakes that we're dealing with, the more people need to know that their work is heroic. So it's not just about understanding that or getting that, they need to be recognized. When we look at Hertzberg's studies of what he calls hygiene factors and motivating factors at work, we find that people need a baseline salary. They need quality relationships at work. They need a safe working environment. But all that stuff is not enough to have them motivated to outperform their mandate. What they also need is a meaningful connection to the work itself, and they need recognition. They need the possibility of growth. They need a path to mastery, and they need to be able to articulate their purpose. And the more that they can do that, the more motivated they are going to be to bring their best selves to work and not just leave it at home for the weekends and the vacations.
And conversely, on the flip side of things, what do organizations need from leadership during challenging times?
So this is a really important point that has come up I do a lot of coaching in different organizations. I'll work with senior leadership teams. I'll work with teams of managers, of directors, of engineers. Sometimes they'll bring me in to help teams bond very rapidly. If they have a new team that needs to work on something very fast, an extreme team with a lot of different skill sets that need to come together quickly. Leaders need to understand that priorities are really important. And if we're not clear about prioritization within an organization, people will be confused about what their individual priorities are. And so, one of the clearest things that people need from leadership is a clear vision and a sense of process for how we are determining what the priorities are within the organization, not just on a long term, which is challenging in this volatile world, but also on a shorter term, year by year, month by month, quarter by quarter, week by week, day by day. How are individuals determining what their priorities are? We also need leaders who have done their emotional homework. It's very hard to increase the positive climate in an organization if the leaders themselves are struggling with joy in their life. So leaders who aren't clear on their own about how to increase their positive emotions genuinely, not in a toxic positivity way, not in a fake it till you make it way, not in a just put on a smile and grit your teeth behind it way, but in a genuine way where they're genuinely experiencing positive emotions at work. If leaders can't do this, it's very hard to inspire others to do it. We also need leaders to fundamentally understand that their job is not to control people. Their job is to inspire people. And that little shift from transactional influence to transformational influence has this ripple effect. So when we talk about the best leaders as being positive energizers, we literally mean there is a contagious element to those positive emotions in the organization. There is an increase in engagement. There's less turnover. There is higher well-being. There's increased profitability. There are higher shareholder returns. We have documented evidence of this. So for leaders to frame it as part of my leadership task is to create a more meaningful connection with my own work, I can help others to create a more meaningful connection with their work as well. Starts with the self.
Well, so I'm glad you said that because that brings me to my next question, which is, how do you connect both employees and some of the more hierarchical structures within an organization to a common and deeper purpose during challenging times?
It's a really great question. And one of the elements that really helps is sort of a slight reframing. We know that hierarchical structures in organizations can be very effective, particularly with certain uh, organizational goals that we have. And we often work in organizations that have a clear hierarchy. So we have what's called formal authority that we've granted to individuals who can delegate tasks, and it can be incredibly efficient and helpful to have this structure. But on another level, leaders need to manifest what we call horizontal relationships. What this means is no one in the organization is superior or inferior to anyone else in the organization, even if one person has the formal responsibility to delegate tasks. This slight shift in from vertical to horizontal relationships changes how individuals communicate within the organization. And if we have an organization that has a very formal hierarchy in place, how leaders are communicating filters down through the ranks. So when the leaders can manifest horizontal relationships, then more junior employees are going to be more likely to share ideas, to communicate what's wrong, what's not working, and not hide it, to celebrate good mistakes as opportunities for learning, to give feedback in both directions, down and up that hierarchy, which everyone needs, and be able to create the conditions for people to really thrive at work, not just survive, not just get by at work. So I think there's, in this sense, that sensitivity that leaders can have to the fact that every encounter is an opportunity to inspire is very important. We can get obsessive about that, and that's not what I mean. I don't mean that we have to make every encounter inspirational. But what I mean is when we pass someone in the hall, it is an opportunity to have a shift, to have someone really be heard, even if for 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute. Those little shifts have a big effect on everyone in the organization. But it takes presence on behalf of the leader. So we talk about how leaders who show up, really show up for their organizations, are showing up with a combination of power and presence. They're showing up with a combination of authority and warmth, not just one or the other. They're showing up knowing that they have maybe have been granted formal status, higher status within the organization. But to be effective leaders, they have to know how to play low status or high status at any given moment. They have to know how to raise other people's status at any given moment. They need to know how to effectively run team meetings so that psychological safety is really key and crucial, but that also so that people feel challenged, appropriately challenged in their work. So not just enough to make people feel safe, they also need to have a vision that is adapting to the challenges that people can take on. We know that when people experience real flow states in or outside of work, when they really dissolve in their work, when they lose track of time, when they feel like the sense of self dissolves, when it becomes something that is truly a peak moment for them, in those moments, they don't have a sense that their work is not as important as someone else's work, or that their work is trivial, or that they could be replaced. All of that stuff can fall away. So leaders have a great opportunity to create the conditions for flow. And it starts with how they establish psychological safety and how they adapt challenges to people's skills and adapt those challenges as people become more masterful in their work.
Well, speaking of adaptability, that's one of the things that I'm also wondering. What's the key to creating the conditions needed for adaptability and resilience to be facilitated within an organization?
Adaptability, it turns out, is one of the most uh, sort of underappreciated and most important skills for any organization in any industry. And sometimes people think, well, the creative industries need to be more adaptable. No, that's not true at all. Everyone needs to focus on adaptability and innovation. Some of the crucial skills involve the ability to pivot. So I'm very lucky. I get to work with my brother, Dan Klein, who's on the faculty at Stanford, and his area of expertise is improvisation. The two of us are often brought into different organizations to help teams with their creative collaboration. And we use a variety of exercises from the improv world to help people reframe how they experience mistakes, to reframe how they experience failure, to reframe how they listen to each other, how they play with each other, how they can pivot on the spot, how they can support one another, and how we can consequently, or in the other direction, block each other. So we do a variety of exercises that help individuals, and I do these in my programs as well, to help individuals learn how to not only accept each other's ideas and accept our own ideas as they come to us, but also how to create ideation sessions where the divergent thinking is separated from the convergent thinking, where we can come up with a quantity of ideas and feel very safe coming up with any idea, and then later move into that analytical, rational ranking of ideas based on specific criteria. That shift can really help open up an entirely different mindset about what we can do. Great leadership in adaptive organizations, have a sense that even if they personally are cynical or skeptical, that they are optimistic about the organization's ability to overcome challenges. And instilling that confidence is so important to be able to say, I don't know how we're going to solve this problem, but I trust that we're going to solve this problem. And I know that you guys are going to solve this problem and we're going to do this together. How can I support you in that endeavor? That's really powerful to be able to say that to an organization. So the other element comes from our work with IDEO and the D School at Stanford, which is in design thinking. So adaptive organizations, they don't just come up with a brilliant idea and it's all done. They come up with an idea, they prototype it, they test it, they make it break, they make it fail, they find out what went wrong, they celebrate the risk they took that caused that mistake, literally celebrate that mistake. They learn from it, they redesign, they prototype, they test, they experiment, make it break, redesign. That iterative process is one of the key components of what we call extreme teaming. So I was very lucky to work with J.F. Harvey at HEC Montreal, and he wrote a book with Amy Edmondson called Extreme Teaming. And in addition to psychological safety, really amazing teams that solve really complex problems, they need shared mental models. They need to know that if we're saying we're going to cross this bridge, they all have a sense of what that means together. They also need a really compelling vision. And the fourth element, they need what we call agile team capabilities. We need teams that are autonomous. They can design, test, and experiment with ideas on their own without running every decision up through the hierarchy and back down. So that sense of Kaizen, of constant improvement, can be ingrained in a really innovative culture. That sense that, I wonder what went wrong with this, rather than, oh, it's your fault that this went wrong. It's wonderful. It didn't work. What can we learn from it? Very cool. Those organizations actually develop some of the most amazing products, goods, and services that we all use.
You know, I feel that training is essential, no matter where you are in an organization, whether you're an employee or a leader. But I wanted to ask you, those leaders who never stop learning, do they tend to create that psychological safety that we were talking about earlier? And why
Yeah,
is that?
yeah. So one of the key components of crafting a culture within an organization that is embodying psychological safety is what we call situational humility. So it's the ability of the leader to show up not as the leader in front of or above everyone, but as a colleague, in effect, who's there to support in a unique way the organization. And that situational humility shows up moment by moment when the leader realizes that not only do they not have all the answers, they can't have all the answers. And if they pretend to have all the answers, the organization suffers. It's a huge relief, actually, for an organization to have a leader who can show up with authentic, appropriate vulnerability. But in addition to that, leaders need to establish that bad behavior is not acceptable. If we allow bad behavior to happen in an organization or on a team, everyone else on the team feels less psychologically safe. So there are some decisive qualities that a leader needs, even if they are exhibiting situational humility. And they need to open up channels of communication. So to do this, leaders need to continually train to become better, not just better listeners, but better assessors of what's needed and also better communicators. And that process never ends. I've never met a leader who said, I'm done. I learned everything I need to know and now I'm good. The best leaders are constantly involved in training. The best leaders are constantly investing in training for their organizations. So I've had the privilege of working in the headquarters of several multi-trillion-dollar organizations. It's so weird to say that now. Several organizations that are making massive decisions that affect billions of people. And what I discovered in these organizations was that the most incredible leaders who are not just making these incredibly important decisions that are affecting all of us, but that are earning deep respect and admiration from the employees who work there. These leaders are approaching it with a sense of a combination of confidence and embracing uncertainty. That's situational humility in action. You hear they're much more likely to say, I don't know. That's an incredibly powerful statement for a leader to make. I don't know, but it can increase trust. So I think there's the lifelong learning also is an element of how do we increase our trustworthiness as individuals? How do we become more reliable, more credible? How do we improve our intimacy? How do we reach out to and connect with people when we need to and when they need us to, not just because we have a reason to reach out and connect with them? And how do we decrease our self-orientation? That training never ends. We can continue to embrace new models of management, new models of leadership, but we can't rest on our laurels. We can't say we've completed our training. And the great news is we are continuing to adapt more and more research into exercises that have a profound effect on leaders and on teams and on the organizations themselves. So for leaders to have a mindset of continuous training, continuous learning, everyone benefits. And since we're bringing in the science of happiness, it's not just the organizations that benefit. I can't tell you how many people describe the changes in their personal relationships and their family relationships with their children, with their spouses, based on developing higher emotional intelligence, based on developing uh, key categories in their life that affect their baseline life satisfaction, that change how they approach well-being on a daily basis.
Thank you so much. That wraps up the webinar. And I really cannot thank you enough, Ted, for being here with us and for sharing your fascinating insights with us. I hope you all have a great day. And we'll see you next time.